one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll wait. First order is public comment. I believe we just got a card. Set the stop clock. Fine, we only have one.
Only one?
Yeah, one. Elena Selleck.
Elena Selleck. I go to West Hills, and bonsoir, good evening. And I'm going to have a thing about why we should keep French. I believe that we should keep French because although the school wants to focus on one language and teach it to more students, language diversity and freedom of choice are the foundation of a good school and can help us in the outside world. Knowing how many people around us speak French, it is essential that it is still an option to take. French is commonly spoken in Canada, Belgium, some parts of Europe, and even Africa. As our wonderful French teacher, Madame Potier, taught us, I know that in Africa there's a place called Cameroon, and French is what they speak there. French is even spoken in Chad, Republic of Congo, Niger, and more. I also know this from French class. I've learned so much about French and even learned more about myself and the people around me through learning a language together, which is a great opportunity and experience. I enjoy learning French and want to continue to connect with other cultures around the world. My mother fluently speaks 5 languages. It's a goal of mine to one day speak the same and more. French is also one of our languages, which is yet another reason why I'd love to continue learning it. I know a lot of Spanish already, and I believe it is important to have at least one language alternative. In our class, there are some kids that are Hispanic and fluent in Spanish, such as Mara Mendoza and Federico Monaro. So French was their only option. Unfortunately, this means that they won't be able to have a language at all, and I personally think it's unfair that some kids don't get the same wonderful opportunity to learn a language like I do. I believe that keeping French will allow numerous kids to continue growing and learning more in our community. Merci, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. Next, Superintendent's report.
Just a couple items I'd like to highlight. We were fortunate to have some visitors from Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, a school district in Wisconsin near Madison, visit our high school. They had planned this visit because they are planning to construct a high school in the future, and we're interested in the design of our high school, not only from a physical standpoint, but from an operational standpoint, an educational standpoint. They were interested in the learning communities, and I was pleased to be able to walk with that team. I suppose there were 15 or 18 people that they brought, and including their superintendent, some people from their Board of Education, classroom teachers, and so forth. And learned a lot from them, and I think they learned a lot from us. And I was very pleased to hear our students speak, talk about their experiences, our teachers to speak about their experiences in the communities. And because I don't often get to hear people speak that directly on that topic, it was very enlightening and informative. Several years in, to see how things have evolved, there was a little bit of a sense of a journey of here's where we were and here's where we are and here's sort of some of our struggles along the way and how we overcame them and worked with them. But I think it's a big compliment to our school district and our educators when others come from around the country to visit. And I was very proud to host, and I think that our team did a wonderful job, and I built some new relationships with the folks from Sun Prairie that I feel like I could pick up the phone and call them and ask them questions, and I learned a lot from them in some of the side conversations. I think it was great. At that same time, coincidentally, Trustee Barron, or Treasurer Barron, had brought in Senator Jim Runstead and conducted a tour with him, so he got to see our school and learn a little bit about us. And we've not had the privilege of having a lot of interaction yet with Senator Runstead, but this gave us opened a door to have some good conversation. I know Howard did most of that. I did a quick handshake and a hello, but I appreciate Howard reaching out and doing that and having that happen. And I appreciate Senator Runstead coming and taking the time out of his busy schedule to do that.
He's on the Education Policy Committee in the Senate.
Okay, so it's very important for him to be able to be informed about different models and what we're doing. I'm very proud of all of our educators, but particularly have to talk a little bit about the Galileo Teacher Leadership Program. This has been going on for, I guess, over 20 years now in Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties. And it is an experience, it's a 2-year experience that we send our teachers to, along with many, many other school districts in the area. and they go on an educational journey that transforms them into, teaches them to lead from where they are, teaches them to figure out who they are as teacher leaders, so that they realize that, and we all need to realize this, that leadership is not position, leadership is action and how we conduct ourselves, and we can lead from wherever we are. And I'm very particularly proud of our teachers who just graduated this week after 2 years in the program, Rachel Matz and Matt McLeod, both at Bloomfield Hills High School, who have really spoken very highly of the program and have been enthusiastic participants and learned and grown and added to their repertoire. And I'm very proud of them for going through that experience, and they've been great ambassadors for our district and great ambassadors for that experience. And I'm also pleased that we had 4 educators from our district who will be entering as now their experience in going in. Tracy Aller, Rhonda Cooper, Dave Lumsden, and Jason Rice all will be, and they were there as well, watching the graduation of their colleagues and then being inducted into that process, which will begin this summer at an off-site 2-day retreat that is quite transformational. I'm thankful to our Learning Services team and our Board of Education for getting fully behind this. This is the kind of work that creates excellence in teaching. And as we've been at this over a number of years, we have now built a cadre of really skilled, folks who have just really had this special leadership experience. So it's not just a one-off or a few people. It's expanded now. We have almost a fraternity or a sorority of people who have had this experience and have this in common and spread that enthusiasm throughout the district. So I'm sure they're going to have a great experience. And lastly, I want to thank our PTOC for, they hosted their luncheon and honored one another, and they do this every year. And it's just a great celebration of all the things that our PTOs at all of our school sites do. And of course, at an event like this, you get to hear about each one and all of the heroes who aren't always recognized, who do things that people don't often see, and they stepped up and were recognizing one another for these incredible sacrificial acts that really help our schools become the best they can be. And so I'm very appreciative and want to thank our PTO, our PTOC, and all of our PTO leaders and presidents across the district for the work that they do, and particularly Nisha Doshi Reddy for leading the PTOC so capably this year and did a great job. And thanks to everyone.
Board President's report. So the most important thing right now the board's working on, just to give you an update, we just came from a study session. Our board has worked hard and diligent over the last couple of weeks. First part of the superintendent search is selecting a search firm. We have now narrowed it down to 2 search firms, and we're going to be interviewing them on 6/5 in this room in front of the cameras. We're going to be reaching out to them. So again, I thank all of my board colleagues for all the work involved in getting us to this point. So we're moving along during the superintendent search. A couple of other things. This morning in the high school, myself and Treasurer Howard Barron were at the high school where they rolled out in the high school No Place for Hate. And we were there, David Buckley was there, a lot of students, signed the banner. Myself and Howard additionally signed the banner. And I'm just going to read the 6 elements that are highlighted on the banner. I will seek to gain understanding of those who are different from myself. I will speak out against prejudice and discrimination. I will reach out to support those who are targets of hate. I will promote respect for people and help foster a prejudice-free school. I believe that no one person can make a difference. I believe that one person can make a difference. No person can be an innocent bystander when it comes to opposing hate. I recognize and respecting individual dignity, promoting intergroup harmony are the responsibilities of all students, and together I want our school to be a place of acceptance. And that goes into, we just came out of a working session talking about social emotional, and our high school has done an exceptional job, taking the lead and doing this and promoting this. And I know they've spent the last 2 days, in addition to a week ago, working on social emotional, and then again, working with this in our high school. So that's an excellent thing that they've done. And then last night,
Well, let me just add to that props to Karen Toomey in the high school for helping to coordinate a lot of that.
And
Marlo. and
people and student and global leaders in the high school. There's a lot of people involved that happen to not be there this morning as well. And then just finally, I know, we're getting into the final season. Last night at the high school was senior honors night, where over 150 students were recognized last night in all their academic accomplishments. And as we're going into, I know tonight is actually prom going on at the high school in downtown Detroit, and they're going into their final season. So with that, that's my board president's report. We'll go into consent agenda.
I move that the Board of Education approve the recommendations detailed in the consent agenda as follows. Request to approve minutes of a closed meeting of May 2nd. Request to approve minutes of a study session May 2nd. Request to approve minutes of a regular meeting May 2nd. Request to approve minutes of a special meeting May 7th. Request to approve the following actions as presented. Monthly financial reports, disbursement reports, bid number 1029, request to approve additional funding for bid 1901, request to approve refuse collection 1-year extension, request to approve SCAMP pay rates, request to approve HR actions, and that's the list.
All those in favor? Oh, sorry. Discussion?
So I'd just like a couple of our HR actions tonight I think deserve calling out. First, I'd like to thank Catherine Young. She had both my kids, and she came to the district as my kids entered elementary school, so we grew up together, I think. She's served, so at that point she was a second grade teacher. She's been in middle schools. She's been a spectacular inspiration for so many children for so many years. I want to thank her for her service. Also would like to especially call out and give great congratulations to Christine DiPilato, who will be leaving us, and thank her for all the years of dedication she's given to our district. I could bring up Dr. Glass, who's on this list as well, but I think we'll leave that for later.
We'll leave that for our next board meeting, which our next board meeting, just to let you know, will be at the high school on 6/6. Any other discussion? All those in favor, consent, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Now we have special reports, enrollment projection report. Paul Wills, Plant Moran, Cressa.
Thank you, President Colin, and good evening, board members and Dr. Glass. It's that time of year where we do the enrollment projections for the district. And just to give a little history, we've been providing the enrollment projections really since 2009-2010 school year. Let me pull this up. So real quickly, so Plant Moran Cressa, we are recognized by the Department of Treasury to provide enrollment projections for school districts. Right now we have about 65 districts around the state. From a mapping standpoint on your screen, so we do everything from southeast Michigan to the west side of the state, and actually even into Illinois, Ohio, and a little bit of Indiana going forward. What I want to do is actually just start with a little bit of demographics of what's happening both nationally, what's happening regionally, what's happening locally here. I don't expect you to read these verbatim, but if you take a look, so Pew Research has been tracking birth rates since 1920. Last year was the lowest birth year on record. So to put it in perspective, anyone that was born in 1956, congratulations, you were the highest birth amount in the state of Michigan. This past year, so you're the height of the baby boomers, Trustee Barron. This past year, the birth rate's been about half of what that number was. We also look at SEMCOG, which is the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. Unfortunately for Michigan, that K-12 enrollment is still going to continue to decline for almost 10% over the next 10 or 15 years. And so some of those things we want to talk about is like, what about the housing stock? What's happening in Southeast Michigan? What's happening with housing prices, availability of housing? And then ultimately get into the specifics of what it means for Bloomfield as you start planning for next year. And again, enrollment's a huge component of that because obviously that's how your foundation dollars are allocated through the state and going forward. So some of the information we're going to take a look at, everyone should recognize the polygon. That is the district's boundaries. So the numbers that you'll be looking at are contained within that polygon. So there's overlaps with some West Bloomfield, Bloomfield Hills, Bloomfield Township, et cetera. But we're looking at what's happening from a geographical information system. We subscribe to Nielsen Claritas. So if you've heard of Nielsen ratings, you go to Kroger, stick in your card, next day you get coupons. Well, our corporate clients love that information. So we actually find that we can tailor some of these reports to what's happening in the polygon for Bloomfield schools. We want to compare you to Oakland County as a whole, and then ultimately to the state of Michigan. I do want to point out, for the last several years, we've used method 1, which is a 6-year average. Going forward, we may want to recommend a method 2, and we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of some of the changes we saw from, let's say, the last 5 or 6 years to this past year. And then ultimately, how does that calculate out going forward? So as I mentioned, this is just a snapshot from 1990. So any student that was born in 2000, so my son is a senior here in Bloomfield, he's at prom right now, and he was born in 2000. Unfortunately, this past year's birth rate is 3,000 students less. So the good news is it's actually leveled off. So when we were here in 2009, 10, 11, I think some of the board trustees goes, well, where's the bottom of this decline? We think we're there. So even though the economy is back, market's hot, you take a look at the birth rate is actually level and actually is going down slightly. So you have 16,000 students that are seniors or freshmen in college this year that are going. There's about 13,000 that are coming in. So as a county, if you take that 3,000 delta over a 10 or 15 year, that's a 30 to 40,000 student less. So the question is, can you move that many students into houses or transition houses going forward? We'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation, but this is a good snapshot of again, the birth rate and some of those impacts that we're seeing from the district's standpoint. So as I mentioned from the demographic report, the good news is you've captured 76.87% of those eligible K-12 students. So if you recall, some of the questions are, well, how many students are going to the private schools and how many are choosing Bloomfield schools? That number's been pretty consistent over the last 3 or 4 years, which is great. And actually, I'll show you some other slides. It's actually, people are choosing Bloomfield at different times. But you take a look at the 7308, that's the total eligible of PK-12. Last year, that number was 7502. But if you take a look above that red arrow and all that stuff, we're also taking a look at the number of families that's in that black polygon. We're taking a look at how many of those households, so the average median household is 60.6 years old. So again, not a lot of young kids coming with potentially 60-year-olds. But as those individuals move out and potentially younger families move in, again, can that help offset some of that decline? You take a look at the number of houses. So again, the number of K-12 per housing unit is 0.33. So if you say, hey, we build 100 homes, how many students would we anticipate coming out of those 100 homes? It's roughly 33 students, of which 76% would then come to Bloomfield. So it's a numbers game. Again, we just want to point this out from a capture standpoint. You've been very steady. So people are choosing Bloomfield Hills versus the private school option. That's been 23% over the last 3 or 4 years. State average is about 10.6%, and then the county average is about 13.6% for that private versus public. You take a look at the total number of school-aged children on the far right. It's 1.8 million. That includes private, public, et cetera. That number was 2.2 million in 2004. Just to give you a perspective of that 400,000 student loss over the last 10 years. So we start taking a look at the cohorts. Again, your feeders of 0 to 5, 6 to 11, 12 to 17, 18 to 24-year-olds. On the far right, you'll see that number when we first started presenting in 2010, that negative 1.5 was actually negative 12.4. And so again, that number's really started to decrease, and that's that slowing down of the decline birth rate, if you will. When you take a look at it more graphically, if you were a district that was very steady, very consistent, these lines would be as tight as possible. And the 0 to 5, that's your next 5 years of feeders. You can see it there, the blue diamonds, roughly 1,847 in 2010. Currently, there's 1,731. Again, that number is going to be pretty steady for the next 5 years. The question you have is, if you look at that 12 to 17-year-old, those are the students that are going to be graduating in the next 5 years, and can we close that delta? We'll talk about that here in a bit. So how does Plant Moran Cresta do enrollment projections? So again, we take a look at the community demographics. We take a look, so I want to just say special thanks to Ms. Kostiuk and Ms. Nuki, who's your student services supervisor. She's been a great addition to the districts, helped us really take a look at the last 7 or 8 years of information, making sure we're looking at FTE or head count correctly. So then we take a look at the live birth. And then we make some adjustments based on what we see for housing, what we see for private versus public. And then ultimately, we come to the pupil enrollment report, which we're here tonight to talk about. So the study itself, I will not ask you to read this eye chart. You're welcome. But what this is this actually is a report that is audited by the state of Michigan. So this is your DS 4061 report numbers. This is district-wide, and this is all pupils. So if I'm a staff member, I don't live in the district, my student comes to Bloomfield Hills, those students are counted within these numbers here. Again, it goes from K all the way through K-12, and then we're also capturing special education. So again, this is FT, more for financing projections versus a head count, which would be a utilization or a capacity type issue, which we've done in the past. So again, these numbers are not made up, they're audited, and then we take this information and put them into another eye chart. So the thick black line that you see in the middle, everything to the left of that is all that historical data. And so I want to kind of start in the upper left corner, if I may. You'll see 2007, that was the birth year. There was 14,089 students that particular year. If you drop down to the K grade, in 2012-13 school year, there was 331 kindergartners that came to Bloomfield Hills schools. That represents a 2.35% capture of those eligible students. So the good news is that number has consistently gone up as high as 2.67, 2.62 in the last 2 years. Unfortunately, this year it's down to 2.44. So again, we can't tell why people didn't choose at the K level coming in, but we just noticed that was something that was a change from the last 3 or 4 years. So again, you got two issues. You got the 14,000 live births, we're now down to 13,445. But still, you're at that 2.4, 2.5%. The way the chart works is actually diagonally, so we circled 2017-18. So that 349 that you see in that circle, the next year you drop down one row and 1 over 1 column, and you have 359 students. So you picked up roughly 3.01%, if you see that percentage underneath those numbers. So the thing that we saw this past year, if you go down to the second grade, you had a 4% growth. And then if you go down to the third grade, for the first time in 5 years, it's actually below 100%, which means you had a loss of roughly 1.3%. That's that, if you look between third and seventh, third and eighth grade, it's a lot lower than it was the last 4 or 5 years. So we started doing some digging. And so the district's been very fortunate really since 2010, 11, 12. The housing values were a lot less. People could afford to move into Bloomfield schools with that cohort or that grade levels. Unfortunately, talking to some local realtors and even just our own MLS, and again, looking at the Zillow, which is, of course, and Trulia, you have two factors. So one is the housing price has gone up significantly in the last 2 years, plus the housing stock is significantly down. And so that's the challenge I think the district's going to face is, again, we've got a declining population. The good news is it's actually leveled off. So we think you're going to be around that 330 incoming kindergarten students for the next 5 years. You're graduating 490, you're graduating 470. You are picking students up at 9th grade. So again, you've got a phenomenal asset in the high school. I think you're seeing that 2 to 3% growth from 8th grade to 9th grade, which is great. It's going to be that middle school and that upper elementary of how to capture those students going forward. So one of the things we've done is taken this eye chart, put it more graphical format. So again, K5 is the blue diamonds, and we know that some of your schools are K3, K4, and I just put a K5 standpoint. 6-8, which is the blue squares, and then the high school 9-12s. So again, the high school is designed, again, this is FTE, so this is not the actual number of students, but you'll be right around that 1,700 number, kind of really through 2028. So the school's designed appropriately to house that student body going forward. So kind of the last slide is kind of the side-by-side comparison. So again, the population is actually increasing in that polygon. What's interesting is SEMCOG had a stat that by 2026 there'll be more 65 and olders in Oakland County than K-12 students, just put in perspective. SEMCOG is the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. They're tied into Wayne State and Michigan State and all those other demographies. The number of households is actually going up. So remember, a household is birth through 24. So yes, my son will be staying at home and commuting to college. And so that's why you're seeing the number of households actually maintaining. As I mentioned, the median age of the families in the high 50s. Then we just did a 2018 projection, kind of private to public, which is a recap. And again, that the two bullets that really talk about the capture rates, 2.44 versus the 2.6, and then just that first time that decrease. So I know some of you board members were on the board in 2010, 11, 12. So we actually went back and we said, what would be the 5-year projection? Because I know we were off from last year to this year's projection. We actually thought you were going to be a little bit higher than what you ultimately ended up being. And so in 2012-13 and 2018-19, we thought you'd be at 51-35 in terms of total number of students. So actually you beat our projection by 141 students. But again, what we're looking at is because of that housing shortage and the increased housing prices, you're going to be in that 5,100 range kind of going forward. So we're actually proposing a method 2 cohort. That's what we showed up on the screen. And again, we've got 3 different methods. Again, we've been using method 1 consistently for the last 5 or 6 years. We think method 2 would be more appropriate, which is a 2-year snapshot to help project out that next 5 years. Because something, again, has changed significantly from where you're at previously. So with that, I will turn it back over to President Cole and the board for any questions.
Anyone have questions?
I know it's a lot of data.
So,
But I can go back in the slide?
Build more houses, will that boost our enrollment?
Yeah, so,
Right?
and that's a great question. I mean, so to give you an example, I think if you look at the Wabeek property, and there's a bunch of homes going up, they've started building the model at Hickory Grove. So let's say you build all 65 of those models. The issue you get into, those starting models are the high 800, 900, up to $1 million plus. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of those young 0 to 5s, but what you may see is people moving from their existing home into those homes, which would free up. But the problem is you're only going to be backfilling 60, 70, 80 homes. So again, when you take a look at the total number of housing units, to offset that delta of 100, you'd have to build about 350 homes a year, every year for the next 5 years. So it's going to be tough. I mean, yes, yes.
18,000 households, so therefore how many build, what percentage of that is?
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge to build as many houses. I mean, what's interesting, out of the 112 districts that are in SEMCOG, they're only projecting 2 that'll actually grow. One being South Lyon and the other one being Brighton. But they have hundreds of acres of empty land that they're building thousands of homes, and even with Melissa Baker and South Lyon, they've only picked up X amount of
so
students.
just
And Cynthia and I sit with the South Line people all the time at Oakland schools, and they're building elementary schools like crazy.
So, it's and I know you probably just mentioned, so what were the 2 main factors why we were off in terms of our projection that you assumed that?
Absolutely. So one is the housing stock. So the availability of people to move into Bloomfield is significantly less than it was even last year.
That what you thought?
Correct. I mean, interest rates are still really low comparatively to where they were in 2007, 8, 9, 10. And the other factor is the housing price itself. So when you start getting over that $250,000, $300,000 price range, you're kind of pricing out those younger families that would bring that maybe this is their second home. So they're moving from.
So did you not think that it was, like, in your projection, that it wasn't going to go up, appreciate as much as it did? Is that?
Yeah, what we thought, I mean, what's interesting, we still showed you overall going down. We just didn't think, if you go back to this slide right here, when we looked at method 1, we weren't expecting a 98% decrease. We were looking at a 101% capture over the last year. So fortunately for your district, if you 1 or 2% can be 100 kids, and I mean, that's a lot of foundation dollars when you start talking 100 student difference. So again, we were looking at the last 5 or 6 years thinking, okay, the housing market's starting to slow down. So we weren't thinking of a 3% increase. It was more like a 1% increase from that 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. And like I said, we get the numbers from the fall count and the spring count. And we're like, better dig into this further and help explain why and maybe some of the challenges that you may face of, I think, the housing kind of bubble. Here
So between using this method 1 that you're saying, and then obviously working very, very closely with student services, we don't expect, well, anything can happen, but we're trying to tighten up so we're not as off as we were this year.
Yeah, so method 2 is much more, it's much more conservative, if you will. And for us, I think this 2 years is probably more realistic, looking at all the factors we've seen this year specifically. So again, if you take a look out 5 years on this chart, you're going to be right around 5,000 students at K-12. It's down from 5,300 where you were at in 2010, 11, 12. And again, there's still a lot of for sale homes. I mean, if you just drive around, there's a ton of houses for sale. The problem is the price points pushing those grades 3 through 8 down where they were 5 or 6 years ago.
Paul?
Yes.
If I'm remembering the way you do the model, the projected here, there are no assumptions
I mean, when we do our budgeting forecast, Tina has projections on the economy, on many, many different things. In this model, it's projected, but it's 100%, as far as I remember, it's 100% projected based on historical data.
That's correct. And then
You don't have any guesses. You don't sit there with a dartboard, kind of jokingly, and forecast what things are. What the projected is taking the historical data and moving it forward as the cohorts mature.
Yeah, so again,
So that what you're doing is so that the Model 1, Model 2, I mean, you're not changing your forecasting process because you don't have any forecast in there, it's just projected. What you're doing, though, is you're shortening the instead of 6-year lag, you do a 2-year lag such that the projected react a lot faster to the historical data.
that's a correct statement.
Okay.
So again, we do adjust it community demographics, but again, it's based on actual numbers.
It's all based on actuals and so instead of, it says historical and projected. It doesn't say forecasted. There is no forecast in your number. It's all just taking the actual information and projecting it out into the future, but you don't have assumptions in there.
No, so if we pulled up, let's say, method 1, you'd see that you'd be right around 5,200 students for the next 5 years, but we know that's not going to be the case based on the last
And
2.
The only reason method 1 and method 2 are different is because it's a moving average in because
the algorithm.
the moving average is shorter, it is more reactive to what is actually happening.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Well, that gets into a question that I had too, because obviously, there are variables that you input, because otherwise it would be a math equation that any of us could do.
But it is a math equation.
Right, but he also lends some expertise from other areas. It's not just simply math, because otherwise we would need an expert.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it is just math.
Well, it's the math, but it's data driven with the demographic piece behind it. So the number of homes, the number
Right,
of
so that's what I was
ages.
gonna ask
Correct.
you. What other than the amount and price of homes do you look at?
So actually, we subscribe to ESRI, which is the Environmental Services Research Institute. It's everything from new job starts, foreclosures, new business moving in. So whenever someone registers their address at the post office, we're buying that information. If they change address, if they file for divorce, if they get married, if they have kids. So I think there's 86 pages of demographic stuff that comes behind this report that we're pulling data from, not looking just straight at the cohort. So, there's other firms, there's Stanford, Middle Cities, and others that provide enrollment projections, through the Department of Treasury. We've just found that when you take a look at the demographic piece and do some of those adjustments, but it is based on mathematics of, it's not just a live cohort, but again, it's the housing stock, and it's the age of the households, and who's choosing private versus public. And like I said, we're just as shocked as I think, the district, when we're like, oh my gosh, why are we down 100 some odd kids? And you look at that first column, you're like, boy, what happened from 3rd grade through 8th grade? And for the first time in 6 years, it's less than 100%. So then you start digging, like, people are still choosing Bloomfield schools. They're just not able to move into the district at the pace that they were for the last 4 or 5 years.
Was it people moving out? Was it students that were in these grades that left and went to, whether it's private or somewhere else?
No, actually, and that's why I give Ms. Dookie a lot of credit. We went like building by building, grade by grade, and back for the last 5 years and said, here's where the growth has been from people moving into that particular boundary of that school. And so if you take out the housing piece and you say, okay, what's just a straight cohort? That's why we chose the method 2. So again, if I pick on an East Hills or Eastover and you look at the percentage of increase, so not only just by grade, but by individual school, they didn't leave the district, they just simply weren't able to move into that particular boundary for the district itself.
Okay, so you think based on your research that it's not a lot of families leaving out the district that's caused the number to go down?
No, like I said, if you take a look back to just the total number of students, this right here, so it's the same number that you had 3 or 4 years ago. It's just, it's not growing back up where it was that 3rd through 8th grade that you've been experiencing for the last 4 or 5 years. And remember 4 years ago, we were like, a lot of people moved in the district. Next year, not as many. And then 2 years ago, it was kind of like right at it. And then this year is down. And so it's tough because when you do it by year to year, again, 1 or 2%, it's a 100 kid swing. That's why I want to give some of the board members who've been here since 2011, 12, we're trying to look over a 5-year period. And it's tough because what is the state going to give you for foundation allowance next year? How many students are we going to have? You're trying to budget June 30. And so I commend the board. I mean, these are, our other 60 clients are dealing with the same issues of like, where's our enrollment going to be? And so again, this is trying to give you a trend model or at least a data point that you can say, hey, if this happens, then this happens. And again, I know the district's got a policy for fund balance, and I applaud the board for that. And again, it's something that helps kind of through these different aspects of enrollment. So.
Just to clarify the point you were making, Paul, so as far as the data is telling you, we don't have an accelerated rate of loss to private schools in the past up to 5 years.
No, actually, so 3 years ago, you actually captured back 1 point, and you've been holding steady at that 23.15%. So.
Thank you.
So what these numbers are saying, though, is over the next 4 or 5 years, we're expecting to have a 200 student decline.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Next, general discussion, report of FFLA. Mark?
All right, FFLA, we met on the 16th. There were 6 things on the agenda. There were 7 things that we ended up discussing because of other at the end. We started with the conversation relative to the Nature Center. There's a new trail that's going in on the north side. Dan Badgley presented on it. This new trail on the north side is not easily accessible, or it hasn't been easily accessible, so they were able to procure an easement on those lots on the north side, and they need to build 2 bridges and build out this path, but it's all being privately funded. It's not going to come out of any dollars out of our operating budget or otherwise. Next thing we talked about was summer facility and technological projects. An update, and Brian and David presented. The bus cameras are done. It came in $9,000 under budget. The Losser turf is done. Relative to the site improvements on this site, there's 2 additional sets of expenditures. One relates to hitting conditions on this site of about $40,000 of additional monies that need to be spent. That'll come out of the Capital Improvement Fund. And then relative to the parking lot on the north side, it was not part of the original project. That's going to be approximately another $100,000, which will come out of the sinking fund. Then relative to the prep program, the demo is done, and that program is currently on budget. East Hills roofing bid is, the bid came in under budget, and actually we voted on that in the consent agenda earlier, so that's yesterday's news at this point. At the high school, there's an issue with the ceiling panels that Brian and his team are looking into, and we'll get more information going forward relative to the longevity of those panels. At the elementary schools, the projectors, they were installed in 2005 through 2007, and they're going to be replacing those projectors, not the boards, but just the projectors, and the difference that we'll see is it'll go from a very dull projection to a very bright projection on those boards. Relative to devices, the mini iPads that are being used in K through 4 are at the end of their life, and they're currently looking into options, whether it be iPad Air or Chromebooks. The next item on the agenda had to do, it was a very quick item, had to do with a water main easement at Way Elementary, and simply stated, it's not intrusive. So that's most we can glean from that. Relative to the conversation about possibly leasing out a portion of the Losser facility, the discussions are ongoing, but the important thing that we took away is that Brian and Tina are very much involved in those discussions, so it hasn't been 100% Rob, and Tina and Brian are prepared to carry those conversations going forward. Next item had to do with the food service management contract, which is being awarded to Aramark. They're working on the contract, they're customizing it for the Bloomfield Hills schools, but before it comes to us, it needs to be approved by the Michigan Department of Education. That will probably be on the June 6th agenda. Relative to roofing, as we've had this discussion about what we're going to do going forward in the district, the discussion that we were having the other night, and whether the money's going to come, we're going to spend sinking fund monies or maybe look to other sources of funding. There's going to be a reevaluation of our roofing needs, so we can consider that in our discussion going forward. And the last item, the trash contract, I was going to tell you that we would be renewing that, but we actually renewed it 10 minutes ago. So, and that was it from FFLA.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions, comments? Jackie, report of the Board Instructional Committee.
Yep, the BIC met on May 20th, and we had 2 items on our agenda, the District Improvement Plan and the ESL Program Update. So Wendy Osterman shared a document with us and to really explain how they gathered the DIP and also how to gather data and the process that she's going to share with ILT. And then she walked us through the school and district improvement plans, sharing the current year actions and anticipated actions and communications. We actually talked in detail about how we use data to make informed decisions and how we look for meaningful ways to update the board and our instructional learning team, and also how they try to inform the community, for example, via the data dashboard. We made a suggestion to add to that the social and emotional learning onto the dashboard. Wendy shared the draft district improvement plan highlights. The LS team made the decision to make one goal, ELA, in the district improvement plan, and that combines the comprehensive strategies and written communication goals from previous years. We had then a discussion just to kind of review what we know about ELA. And the intent of this goal is to strengthen connections between reading and writing through common practice and strategies. And Wendy also shared the district's goals for growth in mathematics, ELA, and culturally responsive environment, as well as some of the measurable objectives and strategies that will be used. And one of the big takeaways, or I think every time we do this, is that we discuss what is actually mandated by the state and how we have to really fit what we want to, our district improvement plan, inside that shell that's given to us and make it meaningful and give us the data that we want and aligned with our strategic plan. Anybody, do you want to, either of you want to mention anything about that? Okay. The other thing on our agenda is the ESL program update, and Lisa Lockhart and Christine DiPilato shared this with us. And we really discussed that there's a variety of programs that we could use to educate our ESL students, and we've looked at our past success and then to actually reevaluate our structure to make sure it's aligned and doing what we wanted to do. And this spring, a team of 14 educators engaged in ESL program structure study to explore and evaluate the structure of how BHF provides support for its English language learners. We did have some discussion about the change of the demographics of ESL over the past 10 years and where they, which building they were. The goals for this review that these 14 educators were anticipating to do was to explore the issues of equity and inclusion, to learn about the other models of support for ESL students, and to address the areas that need and development in our current structure. So Elisa outlined how she went about the process she used to gather that and reflect on the research and literature, the best practices for ESL programs. And one thing, then a takeaway that she shared with us that really stood out is the disparity in the resources available between our schools. And that is largely because the past model was that they would actually bus students to, I believe it's Lone Pine, and they would spend their foundational
time at ESL, not in kindergarten. Kindergarten always went to kindergarten, but other students in elementary school would go to Lone Pine. And so Lone Pine then had good, excellent resources and large classrooms. But they're really looking at the model because it's important not just to take kids out and cohort them, it's also important that they have a sense of belonging in their own neighborhood school. And so they're looking at how to really have a finer balance between that, because there's benefits to both. And so that really then highlighted the differences in the equity and the resources at all the different buildings that the board members are going like, yeah, we got to address that. And so the team that did this review came up with these tenets, that there should be ESL dedicated paras. K-3 will have part of their day learning at their home school. 6 through 8 will continue to cohort the newcomer students. They're going to increase the sheltered content area instruction for 6 through 8. K through 5 students with WIDA 1 or 2 will get additional support, and she told us what the WIDA was. It's a WIDA score. Yeah, the WIDA score is kind of, I had it mapped to the APGAR score, but that had nothing to do with it. It's just somebody's name. But it's basically how you can gauge the student's ability in ESL. The EL support will correlate with the level of need. They're going to increase the SIOP, which is a Shelter Instruction Observation Protocol, which he explained to us as well, which is just a really great way of teaching ESL. And this is going to be more training for general education teachers. This kind of went back to my mind. I kind of mapped it to when we're talking about the 504s or the IEPs or something like that. And the general education teachers really need to have that professional development because they have a sense of anxiety and they don't necessarily feel comfortable, and while the experts are very comfortable. So I kind of saw a parallel between that. So there needs to be more professional development. We need to make sure we have sufficient space in all the buildings for our students. Develop consistency in the non-newcomer support for K-8. They're looking at incentivizing ESL endorsement for teachers in the future because there is a need for that. And explore co-teaching in 4 through 8. And this is really, she shared with us that this was very powerful when a teacher who has that expertise actually co-teaches with a general education teacher, and they take turns and model, and that's really very powerful. And you can imagine that really helps the general education teacher rise up to the challenge and feel more comfortable how to use some of these techniques. Another important thing they want to do is increase the family liaison role to develop more family ESL events. And the next step is to determine the placement for the support for the EL students, identify natural changes in student placement, and discuss the timeline for other program changes. Any question? You want to add to anything?
I just wanted to say huge congratulations to Lisa and Christine and all 14 members of this group of their own initiative. They chose to look at our ELL infrastructure district-wide simply because even though our students perform very well, they said we haven't looked at this in a long time and so we should look at it. And they came up with some very novel findings and some very good ideas to put the program forward. So I really commend all the great work that's been done in this area.
Kind of linking the BIC portion to the FFLA portion. The School Finance Research Collaborative spent a good amount of their report looking at English language learners and have a formula based upon the WIDA score to allocate funds to individual school districts and individual students based upon, so a WIDA of 1-2 WIDA of 5.6, which is you're pretty close to English proficient, is about half the amount of money that you would get if you're WIDA 1.2, and you're just coming from overseas or somewhere where you don't know the language at all. In terms of the current process of where we are today and the budgets that are being proposed in Lansing as we speak, there is no state funding for English language learners. The only funding that we do get incrementally is coming from the federal government. So I think that's Title 4 or 3. Anyway, it's one of the titles. Pardon me? And it's minuscule. Yes, and it's small. It's nowhere close to the percentages that the study says you require. So that is a major change that is being proposed through the School Finance Research Collaborative we're not going to be able to affect what happens out of Washington, but the hope is we can incorporate it in some way over a period of time into the funding that we get from Lansing. Our number of English language learners is modest in the count, but there are certain districts that have 30-40% of their kids in Oakland County even that are English language learners. So this is a significant issue that needs to be addressed by Lansing.
And so some of the resources that they were looking at is just making sure they have a large enough room, because in some schools they only had almost the size of a closet, very small. So just make sure that they had a large enough room and other resources. That was a larger part of what she shared with us.
Anything else?
So we might see that in FFLA in the future.
Third thing, general discussion, not much. Report of high school start time task force. I've been working with Brian Goby in terms of putting together some models in terms of the cost regarding busing, and I intend on having one more meeting with the task force before the end of the year. Board business. First thing is a proclamation celebrating the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, giving women the right to vote. Ms. Efros, do you want to read the proclamation?
Yeah, do you want me to read it? This is the proclamation we were sent, and, all right. Whereas women of every race, class, and ethnic background across America have made historic contributions to the growth and strength of the United States in countless recorded and unrecorded ways. And whereas the women of this nation initiated the most significant women's movement in history, the need for women's suffrage. And whereas, despite strong opposition, the inspiration and determination of women nationwide brought about the extraordinary accomplishment, the right for women to vote. And whereas on June 10th, 1919, Michigan women cast their vote for Michigan voters when Michigan voters ratified the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, whereas the state of Michigan was the second state to ratify the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, and whereas on August 26, 1920, voters across the nation secured the right for women to vote when the 19th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was ratified, empowering American women and declaring for the first time that they, like men, deserve all the rights and responsibilities of citizenship, stating, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. And whereas on April 26, 2020, this will mark the 100th anniversary of the passage of the National Suffrage Amendment, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, guaranteeing the women the right to vote. Now, let it be resolved that the Bloomfield Hills Board of Ed remembers and celebrates the historic women who fought for the right to vote and recognizes the courage and inspiration of these bold women to change the course of history. So I'm making this is a motion for us to approve
That proclamation.
this proclamation.
Support. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Proclamation passes. Next is a request to approve the regular board meeting change schedule 2018-19, and this is just to move the Thursday, June 6, 2019 board meeting at the Bloomfield High School auditorium to begin at 6 o'clock.
Second.
All those in favor?
Could I just make a comment?
Sure.
I had some communication with President Colin over the last few weeks. The August 15th meeting that we have scheduled is The next day, August 16th, is a MASB conference in northern Michigan. So I would request, Paul I know is going to do it when time is available, to do a doodle poll so we can potentially move that one date on August 15th to another date such that it allows people who want to go up there. It's about a 4-hour trip, so it would be great if we could not have that meeting going till later hours on Thursday evening.
Okay. Thanks for reminding me.
And could you recirculate the meeting dates for the upcoming school year when we have a chance?
Yes.
Thank
Will
you.
do. Did I get support on the motion?
I second it.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next is request to approve Board of Education student intern. We as a board from the last meeting, we just needed to clean up some of the board intern responsibilities. We have a one-pager here that kind of outlines that. That's been circulated, and all of my colleagues have a copy of it. So we have a motion. Actually, I want to make an amendment to the motion to change from liaison to the term intern, so that we have a motion.
It's intern on mine.
The motion says I move that
Oh.
so.
I move that the Board of Education adopt the student intern to the board proposal as presented.
Do I have support?
Support.
All those in favor? Oh, discussion?
Just for-
Discussion?
Yeah. Are you going to attach this revised one-pager to the minutes so that, because we're not going to have a discussion about it, but then people who are following this issue can see what we've revised it to?
Yes.
Okay.
And just a little comment, the attachment says, still has the word liaison, so we're just going to have to continue to make the tweaks.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. The next is to request to improve the interim superintendent assignment. We have a motion.
I move the board approve the appointment of Christina Kostiuk, effective July 1st, 2019, to serve as interim superintendent of Bloomfield Hills Schools until such time as the superintendent is appointed by the Board of Education and has commenced employment.
Second.
Discussion?
I have all the confidence in the world in Tina. I think this is a great decision by the Bloomfield Hills School District. I also have tremendous confidence in the team of 3 that are sitting in the back row tonight to assist and lead in this transition. And I think it sends a tremendous message to the rest of the administrators and staff in this district about the continuity of what's going on and the direction of the district. And I'm very, very pleased about this.
Thank you, Mark. Couldn't
second
agree
that
more.
comment.
Yep. Those all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Can we make thank you, Tina. Someone make a motion to add in under E, we have another public comment statement to add in public comment?
So moved.
Okay, okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Deb Macon?
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Deb Macon, and I am a global champion. I am very proud of that fact and owe the opportunity to be in the latest class of global champions to you and the decisions this board made over the years to invest in equipping every one of us to see the world through a global lens, specifically right here in Bloomfield Hills. Because global education, equity, and inclusion was part of the study session, I am surmising that final decision-making may have not yet happened. And with this in mind, I have a few critical observations, comments, and questions to share. First, the last 5 years have been absolutely extraordinary and clearly recognize the district's part in seeing its role in global education, equity, and inclusion. Second, as a very long-time observer and even participant in governance leadership in this district, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that these 5 years, with the excellent guidance of Munir, which was excellent and transformative, builds upon the legacy of many, many, many administrators, teachers, staff, and community activists who came before. And that group I can definitely identify with. There were several components, and I'm confident you know all of them, but there is one in particular I wish to speak to. Of each of the components of the district's commitment, one of them singularly speaks centrally to the transformation and change that must occur, that I believe you all wish to see happen. This is the Institute for the Healing of Racism. I participated in the Institute, and I have publicly acknowledged it was singularly one of the most painful experiences of my life. I knew that because I had been in 2 other institutes. So the way I look at it, about 1 institute every 10 years is about as much as I can handle, and is definitely worth doing. While it was painful to be part of, I know that there was deep learning that I contributed to by sharing my life journey and that of my family, as were others in that session. The deep learning and reflection that must occur for change has to have some of us in that session who are willing to say, and here is what life is like, was like, and we'd like to see changed. So it's with that in mind that I would ask that as you are considering what next steps are, please see that institute as an important and valuable portion of of the district's commitment. Because I've been very freely willing to participate and volunteer in supporting Global Champions, it has been an absolute privilege to have been allowed to have been part of some of the sessions with high schoolers in a support role and with 5th graders as well. Students and their families in this district are waiting and looking for next steps. You have lit a fire. You have done that. You've done it very successfully. So I can only imagine it is going to take as much commitment moving forward to be able to support those students and be able to support those families who now believe that this district is doing something that no other is doing, and doing it in a way that is bold and courageous. It could be a series of tough decisions, and I'm offering a few thoughts, and this is without me knowing what you considered. Regrettably, my work schedule doesn't allow me to come a little earlier. Had that been possible, I can promise you I would have been here at 5 o'clock, because I really do want to know what is in your minds, what is in your heart, and what you're considering as far as next steps. And it's literally with what I believe is a passion for many of you. I see that passion. It was just such a pleasure to be part of so many conversations, so much learning across the broad community. And I would also be remiss if I didn't add, and many of us absolutely know the role of restorative practices in support of all this work as well. So it's with that I would say your community, our community, is expecting great things. We can't just clean one lens on a set of glasses. We've got to go full throttle. We have to keep and continue making it possible for this community to be welcoming, to make it so that everyone feels they belong. I appreciate everything I've learned. This is quite emotional for me. And actually, I can say that it's been worth it to stay here this long, to be able to see the start of more change and transformation. There is more. There is more. All of our students deserve it, and I am not the only one who will be among those looking to see when this governance team says all, who do you mean? When you say all, do you mean all? Thank you for your investment in global education, inclusion, and equity. It has begun a transformation that continues to need fire beneath it to accomplish everything I believe this mission stands for. And with that, thank you for the addition to be included as part of the agenda. Thank you.
Closing comments? Any closing comments? For that, I move to adjourn. Second. Thank you.